Hellhounds, chase ghosts, coming, sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hellhounds, ghosts, demons are coming.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Mr. Hellhound is here to supply you with your hellish nightmares. Before we begin, consider supporting the channel and check out all the new merch, everything from apparel to iPhone cases. Link is in the description. Tonight we have 2 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. Also, if you like this content, then don't forget to subscribe and click the like button and turn on the bell so you get notified every time I upload. Now, let's get right into it. Forever 40, posted by MTP6921. My wife Gina and I never have time for anything. My wife is an event planner for baptisms, weddings, bar mitzvahs at our local golf club, which to be one of the most stressful jobs in the country. People are just so demanding and critical, and everything has to be right. As the manager of a Philadelphian hotel, I am equally as busy as my wife Gina, and it seems getting through a day is almost a miracle at times. Every time the house gets cleaned, it seems to be by the next day it's just a big mess again. With our Civil War era built house, repairs are always inevitable, and it's so hard to get away from being behind the 8 ball. It seemed like Gina and I never have time to spend together, and once again Christmas time is close again. The one thing Gina and I looked forward to was going to the local Christmas tree farm to cut down our own Christmas tree. The same nice man, Gus, is there every year, and he hasn't raised his prices in all the years we have been going. We continued our Black Friday tradition by seeing Gus as we had done so the previous years. He's such a nice man, and based on only charging $10 a tree, he definitely isn't doing it for the money. We borrowed one of his saws, and after carefully deliberation we cut down the right tree. We drove home and put the tree up and decorated the tree with the same ornaments we had for years. It seemed like Christmas time had flew by once again, and on the day after Christmas we have decided to put in new composite flooring in the living room. I always liked the original wood flooring that was over 100 years old, but there was too much wear and tear, and we needed to replace it. I decided that I was going to remove the flooring, so plank by plank I started to remove each piece of wood. The basement has thick original log beams that are about as thick and round as a railroad tie. As I continued to remove the wood planks, I came across an old 35mm projector with rolls of film. Though I wanted to get the job done of removing the old flooring, I was just so curious to know what was on these film reels. I plugged the old projector in the dining room and closed the window shades. The process of setting up the film was a real pain, but I finally got the machine to work. As the machine ran, I was left speechless in what I was watching. It was the two of us, Gina and I, where we were just sitting by the Christmas tree. The quality of the film looked to be around the late 60s to early 70s. I couldn't stop thinking about who took these videos and how did they get the film to look so old. As I continued to watch the film, it dawned on me that Gina and I were always just so busy trying to keep our heads above water that I didn't pay any attention to the years that had gone past. I tried to think how old I was, and I had stopped counting once I hit 40. Then I tried to think about Gina's age, and the same was true, where I couldn't come up with a number. Gina had a heartbreaking stillbirth, and we decided to not try again and forego having children. As long as we were both busy, the two of us didn't think about the stillbirth or the fact we didn't have any kids. Gina was upstairs rearranging her closet, and I yelled for her to come and watch the film. She had the same impression that I had. Then we both had that aha moment. The both of us have been so occupied to keeping our heads above water over the years that we didn't realise that we haven't gotten any older. We both looked at each other and I said, "We're both 40 something, right?" Gina looked at me and said, "Yeah, but 40 what?" We were both only children whose parents were deceased. Both of our jobs were notorious for having constant turnaround, so both of us couldn't say we worked with someone for 10 years. The both of us were just completely befuddled. I knew about every 5 years we would get a new, used car and generally the latest technology regarding our phones, but we just hadn't put the two together, that we were kind of stuck at whatever age that we are now. I asked Gina, "What year were you born?" She paused and said, I don't know." Then she asked me, "What year were you born?" I responded the same, "I just don't know." I remember playing outside as a kid, but anything beyond that was foggy. I had been working in the historic Bellevue Stratford Hotel for so long that that's all I could really remember. Gina basically said the same thing with working in the Philadelphia Golf Club. We both talked to each other and came to the conclusion that we were just purposely kept ourselves so busy so we wouldn't think about not having kids, not having family, and not getting older. We really didn't have any friends, and any conversations we had at work were just work related. Both of our jobs had multiple new owners over the years, and we kind of just went along with the flow. If I hadn't come across this old 35mm film projector, then Gina and I would never have had this discussion, which led to a discussion on how we never discuss anything. The two of us just roll with the times. We never travel, we only take off for Christmas, and our money just goes into a bank account. That was the first time in maybe decades that we actually had stopped to talk to each other. I said, "What year is it?" Gina replied, "I don't know, 2000 and something." I responded, "What did we do for 1999? Gina responds, "You know, we both worked." Then I said, "What about 1989 or 1979 or 1969 or even 1959? We both looked at each other, puzzled. I answered my own question with, "We just both worked." I then said, "What year did you have the stillbirth?" Gina broke down, hysterically crying. It was like I brought up something that should never be brought up. I tried to think to myself and realised that the stillbirth was so traumatic that I kind of blocked it out, where it was just a foggy memory. Then I looked at the old flooring and had a jolt of something that went through my brain. I remembered laying down the same flooring well over 100 years ago. I said to Gina, "How can this be? We have lived through everything, from not having electricity, to having electricity, to driving horses and then cars, and it just happened." Gina said, "Yeah, everything just happened." I was always in the age gap where I was at first too young to fight in the war. Then I hit that cut off, 40 something, where I was just too old. We had seen house after house being built in our Bucks County community, but we just never questioned anything. Much like our rectangular shaped house, we just existed. Nobody stops to look at a pebble and says, "Wow, I have seen that pebble every day for years," because it's just there, much like Gina and I. As the film ended, Gina asked me, "So, what does this mean now?" I replied, "I don't know." I put the old projector back where I found it, and I decided to put the old flooring back. Without having kids, Gina and I never bothered to take pictures of each other. Our parents died so long ago that pictures weren't readily available. The thought of the stillbirth put both of us back in the trance. Like states, we went back to work the next day, and we kind of knew what we had to do in order to not think about our lifeless baby. So much so that the year had come and went again, and we were ready to get another tree for the Christmas. We drove into Gus's tree farm, and Gus greeted us. I couldn't stop thinking about the year before, when I discovered the 35mm film, and Gina and I discovered that we couldn't think how old we were. I greeted Gus by saying, "Hey Gus, how did the year go for you?" Gus replied, "You know, busy as usual." I remembered Gus's wife, who used to work with him and then unfortunately passed away some time ago. The only time I see Gus is during Christmas time, and when we get the tree. Much like the pebble, most people don't pay attention to Gus, and most people just get their tree in whatever temporary parking lot tree stand that props up. I then said, "Hey Gus, how many years have Gina and I been coming here?" Gus stopped and said, "You know, I'm not really sure." I then said, "Do you think it was 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years?" Gus kind of looked at me and said, "You know, it's just something that I just don't think about." I then said, "Well, how many years have you been tending to the Christmas trees and selling them?" He looked at me and said, "Geez, I really don't know. I'm not sure what year it is really right now." I then said, "I remember your wife when she used to work with you." Then Gus kind of blanked out for at least 30 seconds or something. It seemed like he did everything possible to not think about his wife who died. Gus gradually regained his attention and seemed to have a thought and said, "Yeah, I remember my wife died about the same year your wife was pregnant." Gina and I drove home after getting the Christmas tree, and Gina was so depressed, thinking about the death of our stillborn baby, that she went right up to bed, without helping me put up the tree. I had my usual bourbon, and I didn't think about anything other than unwrapping the delicate old ornaments. The more bourbon I drank, the more emotionless I felt about setting up the Christmas tree. I actually put myself in a daze, staring at the tree that I had just assembled, where my mind was quickly rewinding through the years. It just seemed like year after year I set this tree up by myself, and when I'm done there's very little difference, appearance-wise, from the years past. We don't have any handmade ornaments that kids would typically make, and instead we have just shiny ornaments that I can't even recall where we got them from. I tried to conjure up thoughts when I was a kid, but I have zero memories. I make my way to the front door and look to the left of my house and get a memory. When the owner of the house next door used to hitch his horse in front of his house, but now I see some generic foreign car. For the heck of it, I knock on the neighbour's door, and a man and woman answer that I have never seen before. "Can I help you?" the man says. "I was just seeing if Isaac lived here." "No, we have lived in this house for the past 10 years, and we don't recall an Isaac. The previous owners were Tom and Marjorie Davies, who lived here for a long time. And I'm sorry, but who are you?" "Oh, excuse me, I'm Ted. I live next door with my wife Gina." "Oh, okay. That's right. You and Gina must work different shifts, as we have noticed that both you and your wife come home at different times. I'm guessing that your wife helps get your daughter ready for school each morning," the man says to me. "I'm sorry, sir, but my wife and I don't have any children." "Well, there's a school bus that comes in front of your house Monday through Fridays during the school years, and a girl gets on the bus." "That's impossible," I faintly utter to myself. "Yeah, it just seems like nobody is ever home at the same time at your house, and we never see anyone waiting for your daughter when she gets off the bus." I reluctantly take the flask out of my pocket and take a swig, as I try to process what my neighbours are telling me. "Have you ever met my wife, or the girl you say that you see get on the bus?" "No, and we never met you before either. The Davies had mentioned that you guys were quiet and were good neighbours because you never bothered them. The Davies, they just don't ring a bell at the moment. Anyways, it was nice to meet you, and I'm sorry to have bothered you." The neighbours looked completely confused by my responses as I turned and walked back to my house. I have to go into work soon, as does Gina, because nobody other than us is willing to work during the holidays. I look at the Christmas tree in my living room and I say, "A girl who gets on the bus each morning? That's odd." I make my way upstairs and see Gina sleeping. We have a spare room that is accessible by walking through our room, which was going to be used as the baby's room that died at birth. I looked at the door to the spare room and I just can't recall what is currently in that room, or how long ago I went into the room. The alcohol really started to hit me, so I decided to hit the bed before moving another step. When I woke up, I noticed Gina wasn't there anymore. I looked at the wind-up clock on my nightstand and realised that she must have went to work. I rubbed my eyes with my palms of my hands as I remembered talking to the neighbours earlier today. I looked over at the spare room. That's strange, I said as I noticed the door to the spare room was left slightly open, and before I passed out I remembered that it was completely shut closed. I always told myself in the past, don't go into the spare room, because the memories of what ifs will just haunt me. I attempted to go towards the spare room. I better not, I say to myself, because I have to get ready for work and I don't want to start drinking again. I quickly get dressed and head out the door. Before I get into my car, I get the overwhelming desire to get more information about the so-called girl who gets on the school bus in front of my house. So I go next door and knock on their door again. I'm sorry to bother you guys again, but can you please describe what the girl looks like who gets on the bus? Oh sure, she's probably in high school with light brown hair and about 5'2"-ish, I would say. Just looks like an ordinary girl. Oh great, thank you. As they both look at me like I have 3 heads for asking that question. I get into my car completely perplexed, and I think to myself, boy, that description of that girl seems similar to Gina, but that's impossible. My brain seems to be in a forever fog, where I have a hard time remembering anything, and I still can't wrap my head around my neighbour telling me that there's a girl who gets on a school bus in front of my house during the school year. I keep meaning to confront Gina about that, but we never seem to cross paths at home. I have dealt with stress over the years by drinking bourbon when I get home from work and by jogging before work. As I finish jogging my 5 miles on the public trail by my house before going to work today in the pouring rain, something piqued my curiosity about a woman I observed heading off the main trail and getting on a branch of the trail that I had never taken before. I know logically the branch isn't a shortcut to anywhere, as it leads to a major road and on one side and the creek on the other. Why would this woman go into this muddy, unpaved area for no logical reason? I kept thinking to myself. Over the years I've seen a small handful of people veer off towards the same branch, but I never had enough time to check it out. After work I was so curious that I walked back to the branch of the trail. As I entered, I was impressed by the dense forestry, which was nice, especially because the rain had subsided and the sun had been really beating down on me. I followed the path, in which seemed like a coordinated maze, where if I took the wrong turn, then I would start back at the beginning. After an hour of being frustrated, I finally came to my senses and marked the soft ground with X's with every turn I took to indicate that I had taken that way already. Almost like a Super Mario game, I took a left turn and I finally made it to an area that I haven't been to before. It was a little odd, this new area, because it had vintage warning signs saying to stop and that I wasn't authorised to go any further. I didn't know if the signs were a joke or not, that somebody had put up decades ago, but logically there should be nothing here, as this is all local government land. As I looked ahead, things just seemed brighter, almost like I was coming out of a dark movie theatre and going into the sunlight. I couldn't help but see what was causing the area in front of me to be so much brighter, so I continued to walk towards the brightness. The light was so bright that I couldn't see so I put my hands out so I wouldn't walk into anything inadvertently. I would periodically try to open my eyes, but it was still too bright, and as I kept on walking and walking, what seemed like an eternity later, I was finally able to slowly open my eyes and not be affected by the bright sun. As I looked around, absolutely nothing looked familiar, and it seemed like I was almost in a desert, which really didn't make sense, but instead of sand there was red gravel. I looked up and I couldn't see the sun, which I thought was odd, but I saw something else instead. That might have been the moon that was projecting off enough light so that I could see. I looked around and I saw a mountain after mountain in a 360-degree view, which had zero sense, considering nothing like this landscape existed around my house. I knew that I had been walking for some time, but I couldn't have been walking for that long. I look down at my cell phone and I see 5:30 PM, and I say out loud, this can't be right, because that's the time that I saw when I first started the maze. Even worse, I have no cell phone reception, so I can't use Google Maps to pinpoint where I am. The oddest part is that I see no evidence of the trail that I just came from, so I just start to doubt which way I need to go to find the trail. I always heard that being lost is terrifying, and I'm starting to get more and more nervous as I don't see the road or the creek, but instead I see a panoramic view of mountains. Since I see something that kind of resembles a structure or a small building in the distance, I decide to walk towards it. As I get closer and closer, the building starts to resemble one of those old aluminium or steel looking diners from the past. Eventually I realise that it is definitely an old diner that seems to be open for business, but there's no parking lot and no sign indicating the name of the diner. I open the doors and go inside, and I see that there are no other customers. I figure the waitress must be in the kitchen, so I just sit in the closest booth by the front door. After a few moments, the door to the kitchen opens, and I say, "What the hell?" as I see this robot-looking waitress that is a cross between C-3PO and Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. It has legs and arms and slowly bend, and she says, "What can I get for you?" I am surprised that she sounds almost like a GPS navigational voice rather than a monotone robot. "Where am I?" I ask. "You are here." "Which is where?" "In the diner." "Does this diner have a name?" "Yes, it's the diner." "What town is this diner in?" "I don't know what town means." "How about city?" "I don't know what city means." "What do you know?" "To ask you, what can I get for you? Do you have soda?" "No, I'm sorry, we do not." "Do you have water?" "No, I'm sorry, we do not." "Do you have anything?" "Let me check in the kitchen, I'll be right back." I'm not the most technologically savvy person, so I don't know if robots are an in thing now, but I can't recall seeing any headlines, and I don't remember anyone talking about robots functioning as waiting staff. I know that there are robots in factories, but they just look like machines that have simple functions, where this robot walks and talks and answers questions. "No, I'm sorry, sir. I looked in the kitchen and we don't have anything. So why did you ask me what I wanted?" "Because that's my job." "So why didn't you just say, 'I'm sorry, but we don't have anything'?" I don't know. I should start saying that. Whatever, I just want to get home. Can you tell me if I'm in Bucks County? No, you're in the diner. Realising that I was going nowhere fast, so I decided to just get up and look around to see if there was anything that could help me identify where I was currently located, while the robotic waitress just stood by my table. As I looked around, I saw a bathroom and a kitchen, but the diner was absent of people, and there wasn't even a pot in the kitchen, or even utensils. By the checkout area, there wasn't a phone or a cash register, but there was a brochure advertising Memory Lane. As I looked over the brochure, I didn't see any address listed or directions on how to get there, so I reluctantly asked the robotic waitress, "How do I get to this Memory Lane?" "Yes, Memory Lane is towards that mountain over there. You can't miss it as you get closer." As she pointed her finger to the biggest mountain that I'd ever seen in this area. "How did you know that?" "I'm sorry, I don't understand," the robot responded. "Oh, never mind," I said as I left the diner in frustration. "I have no idea where I am, and this whole area is completely barren," I thought to myself. I've been to the west coast and I've seen the Joshua Tree Desert, but I've never seen anything so desolate in my life. I haven't even seen a weed growing or any signs of water, just rocks and this reddish gravel that blankets the ground. As I get closer to the mountain, I really wish that I had brought water with me, as I was starting to get really thirsty. As I got closer, I started to see this old resort-looking building, made up of stones that I couldn't tell when the structure was built, but I did see a wooden sign etched with the words Memory Lane in red lettering. As I went through the double wooden doors, I got a sense of familiarity being inside this building. I walked up to the reception area and another robotic looking woman came out, but this one looked familiar to me in my personal life, sometime in the past that I just couldn't put my finger on. "Oh, hello. I heard that you were coming." I just couldn't stop looking at the robot as my brain was trying to figure out what was so familiar about this robot. "How did you know that I was coming?" "The diner notified me." "There's no phone in the diner. How did that robot tell you that I was coming?" "I don't understand your question." "Never mind. Where am I?" "You're at Memory Lane." "Yeah, I saw the sign, but what town am I in?" "I don't understand the question." "Never mind. You look really familiar. Do we know each other?" "Yes, we do. Who am I?" "You're Theodore, but you like to go by Ted." I was absolutely stunned that this robot-looking human knew my name. "How did you know that?" "I don't understand the question." "How do you know my name?" There was a pause of silence, and then the robot-looking human said, "Would you like a room, Ted?" "Sure, if it comes with water." "Yes, Ted, it does. Come with all the water you want." I was shown to my room, and I was starting to get stressed out about the possibility of missing work. But at least I have water now, I thought to myself. As I laid my head on the pillow, I had the feeling that I had been here already some time in the past, but I couldn't figure out how long ago I was here. As my eyes started to get really heavy, I thought to myself, is that receptionist my mother, who I just couldn't remember what year she died? Budget beef. Posted by MTP6921. I partied too much my freshman year in college, and I wasn't able to pull my GPA higher than 3.0. I graduated with a quality control engineering degree, and I wasn't in high demand. When I went to my senior year jobs fair, just about every employer I talked to laughed in my face, besides one employer. The potential employer was Budget Beef, and it was located in Matahula, Mexico, which is about 300 miles north of Mexico City. The HR representative said that the company owns 4 square miles of land where they raise beef cows and sell it to emerging fast food franchises at cheap prices. In addition to beef cows, he told me, they get dairy cows as well, who no longer produces milk, and mix their meat with the beef cows. I really had no other choice and agreed to take the position. If I lasted a year, they would reimburse me my travel expenses. After graduation, I took a flight down to Mexico City, and someone from the company drove me to Matahula. When I arrived at the farm processing plant, I was amazed how big the compound was. There was thousands of cows and so much land that I wasn't able to see it all, and there were 2 very large processing plants. I arrived on a Sunday and I was expected to start the next day. Stan was my mentor, and he showed me the processing plant that I was going to be assigned. I grew up in Denver and had 0 experience working with cows, which I fully disclosed when I interviewed for the position. Stan told me the 2 plants process hundreds of cows a day. He told me the company wasn't happy with its output and was looking to see if the factory I was assigned could be more efficient. I was assigned the beef cow plant, and the other plant processed dairy cows, which were brought over to my plant to be mixed with the younger, more tender beef cows. Stan and I drove in a golf cart, and he showed me about 2 miles of land where the beef cows grazed. He pointed to the area where the dairy cows were, but we didn't actually see them because it was too far, and he didn't think the golf cart had enough gas. I worked 6 days a week. My apartment was owned by the company, which was across the street from the processing plant. I would see a continual amount of tractor-trailer trucks transport the meat from the plant and then to northern Mexico and the United States. The compound was heavily guarded by ex-military armed men who patrolled the whole 4 miles of the compound. I met the CEO of the company. He was a tough, old-schooled southern millionaire from Texas. He didn't care about anything else but numbers and how much chopped meat and hamburger patties we were producing for the fast food taco and hamburger joints. I didn't have a car and relied on the company to transport me to the local supermarket. I started putting on weight from watching too much television, so I decided to start jogging again. I jogged around most of the perimeter of the compound, besides some areas that were off limits. I got used to the sun and the heat, and eventually it didn't bother me. Everything was going good until one night I was woken up by a frantic Spanish-speaking man who was completely naked in my apartment. I had made the mistake of feeling secure and leaving my door unlocked because of the large amount of security guards that patrolled the compound. I was dead asleep, and all of a sudden the man, who was profusely sweating, came barging into my room. I was later told by Stan that the compound was located on the migratory route for migrant workers from South America. The second he came barging into my room, he kept saying, "Ayúdame, which was one of the few words I understood to mean help me. Fortunately, security knew the guy had come towards my apartment complex, and there must have been 10 armed men who quickly subdued the man. The man didn't leave without putting up a fight though. I really didn't sleep much of the remainder of the night. I didn't know if that man was a local or one of the migrants, but seeing the absolute terror in his eyes was haunting. As more time went on, I wanted to know everything about my company and the compound. I would watch some trucks pull up to the compound and unload cows, and then other trucks would take the meat away. There was also about 100 local people who worked in various departments of the compound, who were trucked in each day by yellow buses. On Christmas Day, the processing plant was operating at minimal capacity, and I noticed while I was jogging that security was lax. I decided to use this opportunity to sneak into the more restricted part of the complex that was about 3 miles away. I was stunned when eventually I observed walls that surrounded about a half-a-mile radius. I thought the walls were that's what I had observed in the past, but I was always too far away to be certain. As I got closer to the wall, a security car quickly approached me and asked me for security clearance. I apologised to the man, and he took me to the main headquarters, where I had never been, and was the CEO resided. They actually put me in handcuffs and made me sit for 2 hours before the CEO came and met with me. He was a real stern and told me, "Son, if you can't follow the rules we have established here, then you're going to be terminated." I thought to myself, what the hell is so important that it had to be done in secrecy? The main thought I had was that the walled-in area was either being used for mining something or extracting oil from the ground. The company was basically leasing the land with a 100-year agreement with the Mexican government, and they didn't own the mineral rights. At least that's what Stan eventually explained to me. Then I thought that perhaps the man who barged into my room was working in the mine, but I still couldn't figure out why he was naked. I learned that Stan had the security badges and clearances to go wherever he wanted, because he was considered upper management and my boss as well. One day he came over to meet with me, and at lunchtime he started to have a seizure that lasted about 2 minutes. He had told me he had epilepsy that was controlled by medication. I remember from the first aid lifeguard lessons that I took was just to keep the person safe. As I was watching Stan finishing his seizure, I realised he was wearing his security badges, which I removed and put in my pocket. He was in a real stupor when he started to come out, and I asked him for his security passwords, and he mumbled, "The cows don't eat people," and then he fell unconscious. Being in my early 20s, I was starting to get bored of the job, so I really didn't care if they fired me, and I decided to use Stan's security badges to see what was going on behind the walls. So while Stan was taken away to the hospital, I affixed his security badges to my shirt, and then took the golf cart to the walled off area. I approached the wall, and the security quickly came over to me. I showed him my clearances, and they questioned me about the clearances, and I told them that I was recently promoted. Then security asked me for the password, and I said, "The cows don't eat people." They were fumbling on their walkie-talkies, and they were trying to reach Stan. I don't think they realised he went to the hospital, and I basically told them in a stern tone that I didn't have time, and Stan told me that I needed to check on something behind the walls, and if you don't let me in, then you're going to be in trouble. Security reluctantly allowed me in, and the second I got behind those walls, I was completely stunned. From a distance, I saw hundreds of people walking around completely naked in a field. They kind of were just either standing, laying down, or were walking around aimlessly. I watched them for about half an hour. Then eventually a tractor came out pulling a cart that had food, and the naked people walked towards the food. The armed guards watched over from the towers. Also, I observed a security woman watching radar from overhead planes. I could hear her communicating with a pilot who worked for the company. My mind was racing and I wasn't sure the purpose of the naked people. I thought they were prisoners. Were they being used for experiments? Or was there something much worse going on? Nobody talks, so it's difficult to get answers. I decided to leave the walled off area and head back towards the processing plants. With stand security clearances, I then went over to the dairy cow processing plant. The plant was equally as secured as the walled off area. The same process occurred where I showed them my clearance with the same password, and eventually they let me in. I made my way to the upper viewing area. I really was in complete shock at what I observed. A tractor trailer backed into the loading dock. Armed guards opened the back of the truck, and a naked person after naked person were instructed to walk through a walled-in pathway that got narrower and narrower until only one person at a time could fit through, which was almost like a funnel. Anyone who didn't walk or walked too slow got tased. As the people were funneled single-filed into the plant, they eventually came to a doorway that was partitioned off by a non-see-through plastic barrier. As each person walked through the plastic barrier, they were quickly shot in the head with something that looked like a nail gun. Then they fell into the conveyor belt and were hoisted up by their two legs, and then their meat was processed. I was in shock in just how willingly and orderly all the naked people were hurled off the truck and went to be slaughtered. Most of the people came off the truck were younger adults. Then the next truck backed in, and people on the truck acted completely different. They too were all naked, but they were yelling and screaming, and their ages varied. Security was beating them, and the people were constantly being tased. All of them eventually were put down and were slaughtered. I'm not really sure how to describe what I felt watching everything unfold. I'm not sure if playing years of video games and watching horror movies just completely desensitized me. Why didn't I run and stop what was going on? The people on the last truck were yelling in terror. I kept saying to myself. I eventually left the plant and went back to my apartment. I just laid in my bed for hours, and eventually I fell asleep. I gradually woke up and had a feeling like I had taken a 100 Benadryls. When my eyes eventually focused, I realised that I was laying on my back outside, and I was looking straight up into the sky. I then realised that I was completely naked. I then said, "Oh shit," because I realised that I was within the walled off area, grazing in the field with the rest of the people who were going to be slaughtered. Panic started to kick in. I quickly regained consciousness. I kept circling in place, trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation. I tried walking towards the security guards, and each time I did, they tased me with a prodding iron, and I would fall to the floor. I tried talking to the other people, but it was like they were never taught how to communicate with anyone. They kind of walked around aimlessly and would occasionally stop to drink water from one of those hoses and pick up food scraps. There must have been thousands of naked people all spread out in a quarter-mile area. As I walked to the other end, I noticed that there was a large barbed wire fence separating 2 additional areas. One area was for children, and the other area was for pregnant women. I observed a tent with hundreds of cribs set up. Women would go around and bottle feed the babies. The women wouldn't pick up the babies. They would just reach in with the bottles. The toddlers and other children would just sit or stand in their cribs. The young babies would cry, but no one would respond. The pregnant women just walked around aimlessly. I'm not sure if they even knew they were pregnant. I couldn't watch the children's area because it was too depressing. As a whole, little physical activity was encouraged, with the intent to keep as much weight on the people as possible. Everyone had a numbered GPS tag fastened around their necks. The security guards would find a particular person. Then someone would quickly evaluate the person's weight and tone. If the evaluator thought the person was acceptable, then that person would be brought to the tractor trailers. There was no arguing and no fussing. The people just obeyed the guards. The bathroom situation was revolting. There were rows of toilets spread out in different locations. The smell of feces and piss permeated the air. There were flies everywhere. There were areas with mounds of hay where people would sleep. I was in the fields for days. It was absolutely the most horrifying experience because I didn't know when they were going to tell me to go to the truck. Any type of physical contact was prohibited. A security guard would come around with tasers if that occurred. About once every 3 days, the guards would come around with the hoses and hose each person down. The days were extremely hot and the nights were cold. The people knew to instinctively rub mud on themselves to protect their skin. After 2 weeks, one of the security guards instructed me to follow him. I really had no idea what they are going to do to me. I was shaking in fright. Eventually, I got to the wall and one of the guards threw a robe at me and told me to put it on. I was then instructed to sit in a shed, which was not far from the wall. The CEO came into the shed and I put my head down. He said to me, "I know the last couple of weeks have been hard on you. You have 2 choices. You can go back to the field or you could join the upper management of my team." I said instinctively, I want to join. He said, "Great. Are you going to run off the first opportunity you get?" I replied, "I have nowhere to run to. Nobody came looking for me in the last 2 weeks, right?" He nodded his head in agreement. I then said, "Why did you do this?" He replied, "There are too many people in this world and not enough cows. People want their tacos and their burgers for $1, and that's what we provide." I then said, "Who are the people who don't willingly go to get slaughtered?" He responds, "Those are migrant workers who are trying to escape from starvation. We pay $20 per person. We have hunters who bring them to us. Those people would eventually die sooner than later. The rest of the meat is bred on our farm." Then I was taken back to my apartment and things returned back to normal for me. Eventually, I would eat the budget beef hamburgers, with ketchup of course, because I realised that I already had been eating the same beef since I was a kid. Life on the farm was going well for me. I was making $70,000 a year, so I was living like a king around here in this area of Mexico. I had 0 expenses, so all of my pay was take-home money. I now report directly to the CEO, who gives me different tasks to try to complete. I just finished training a young man from Slovenia to work my previous position, and now I'm tasked with finding doctors and veterinarians who will look over our human cattle, because we lose too many of them to sickness. The medical team that we get oftentimes tries to escape, or they end up killing themselves. There is no escaping, because everyone gets hunted down, and we then turn the escapees into cattle. My current job is to find incarcerated MDs or veterinarians from South America and pay the prison wardens a substantial amount of money to release them into our custody. Most of the incarcerated medical people have long prison sentences who would do anything to get out of prison, so it doesn't take much for them to want to work on our farm. They get weirded out at first when they arrive on the farm, but eventually they realise that it's much better than spending countless years in prison. Some of the prisons in Ecuador and Peru seem to intentionally give their doctors larger than normal prison sentences because they know we'll pay a premium for them. The CEO praised me for getting 3 actual doctors and already had me on my next mission. We need more beef, the CEO told me after he sat me down in his office. How about multiple pregnancies? I responded. Say what? He said to me with skepticism. Why don't we use an artificial insemination or in vitro fertilization to ensure multiple gestations at a time versus one every 9 months? Keep talking, you got my attention. We pay a reproductive doctor to teach our medical staff how to impregnate our female cattle with multiple gestations, and also how to run the lab. That's a fantastic idea, but how much money would that cost to have a reproductive doctor come here and teach our medical staff everything they need to know? Well, it won't be cheap, I can tell you that. I have a better idea. I know one of the prison wardens in Venezuela who doesn't have enough money to pay his guards, so I'm sure he could find me a reproductive doctor who can't seem to follow the law. That's an excellent idea. Well, I can't take full credit for this idea, because you're the one who put the thought in my head. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. Don't call me sir. Call me Bob, for heaven's sake. Okay, Bob. I'll start calling you Bob, as we both started laughing. I'll tell you what, since you've been such a valued employee to me, I'm going to allow you to bend the rules. What do you mean, Bob? Well, you might be a little young to remember Blockbuster, but I'm sure you remember Redbox. Yes, of course, I used to rent movies all the time. Well, for this week only, I'm going to allow you to rent some of the female cattle, but of course, you have to use protection. Oh my god, Bob, that would be fantastic. Then go ahead and go rent you some cattle. I literally ran out of the office like a bat out of hell and headed right to the grazing field and picked out a suitable rental to bring back to my apartment. Each female cattle was hosed down before being taken to my apartment, and I really lost count on how many rentals that I took out. By the end of the 7th day, I must have rented close to 100 cattle, to the point where I ran out of condoms. My next task was to go to Venezuela to meet with the prison warden to see his progress on finding us a reproductive doctor. When I got to the prison, I was pleasantly surprised when the warden took me to the guard's tower and showed me the reproductive doctor who was roaming the prison courtyard. The doctor was recently incarcerated on a life sentence for conspiring against the Venezuelan president. We both agreed that the doctor needed to spend a few more months behind bars before our farm could purchase him. That way he would be willing to do anything to get out of prison. I returned back to the farm and continued doing general management tasks. Luka, the young Slovenian guy that I hired to replace me, was doing a good job with quality control, where he found areas in the processing plant that could be more efficient that I even overlooked. A few months went by and Bob had asked me to take a look at the cattle fields to see how we could separate the males from the females, because the males are going to become obsolete when the reproductive doctor comes to our farm. So I walked over to the walled off area where all the human cattle freely graze. Once I get behind the walls, I see a familiar face, getting hygienically hosed down from when I had a week of free rentals, and I was stunned at what I observed, because she was obviously pregnant. Oh crap, I impulsively uttered out. The captain of the guards was chewing out his underlings for allowing her to get pregnant. We have strict breeding requirements, and you jackasses allowed her to get pregnant where she hasn't produced any grade A cattle. She was due to be slaughtered. If you fucktards did your job, then this wouldn't have happened. But little did the captain know that Bob had allowed me a secret fringe benefit where I had a week of free rentals with the female cattles. I felt a really odd paternal instinct kick in, which was pretty strange because I had learned to feel no emotions towards the cattle. But I have a pretty good feeling that she's carrying my baby. To make it even harder, she was instinctively looking at me to protect her. Things only got worse when I saw two other rentals who had the same baby bumps. I slapped myself in the head for doing something as stupid as not wearing protection. None of the cattle ever learned how to talk, read, or do anything that a typical human would do. They were literally taught how to act like cows. I started to feel really overwhelmed, and I realised that I had to meet with Bob now to discuss my mistake, or else my offspring would turn into veal. My biggest concern is that he'll turn me into cattle once he learns of my mistake. Sir, I need to talk to you. I really fucked up. Ted, I told you already to call me Bob and not Sir. Sorry, sir, or I mean Bob, but I really did something that I shouldn't have done. Well, what is it? Do you remember when you gave me a week of free rentals with the cattle? Yes, of course, you earned that. Well, I rented so many of the female cattle that I ran out of condoms and proceeded to fornicate with them anyways. You did what? I had sex without protection. Okay, and? Well, at least 3 of them are pregnant. Oh shit, boy. I have so much other crap to worry about, and now this. I'm really sorry, Bob. I really just got caught up in the frenzy. Well, you don't know that they're yours. You know they mingle with the other male cattle. Bob, you know how militant our guards are, as they take great pride in allowing unauthorized mating. The males are virtually petrified to go near the females for fear of getting tasered unmercifully. How do you know the guards didn't slack off a night or two? Bob, I can't see that happening. The guards send all their money they make back home, and they would not do anything to jeopardize the life of being virtual kings and that they're currently living. Plus, the captain of the guards is a real hard ass on them. Well, I'm telling you right now, to get that out of your head, that those are your kids. This is no place to raise children, and besides, you don't know for sure. Those female cattle and those baby cattle are meat, and that's it. Now get out of this office and don't bring this up again. But Bob, the female cattle were looking at me like I was the father. Real quick, none of those cattle have any rational thoughts. They are raised to be animals. You're thinking how someone reads a horoscope and says, "Oh, that's definitely me." Well, it's not. And those females will look at any males in those ways. So like I said, drop it now. Don't even whisper another word about our meat outside this office. Okay, Bob, I understand. As I left Bob's office, I knew that I had a real big decision to make. I've always been a follower because it's just who I am. A big part of me just wants to take Bob's word that those females didn't get pregnant by me. But all three of them look like they're at the same stages of pregnancy, of about 4.5 months pregnant, which I probably wouldn't have even noticed if they weren't walking around naked. Not too many girls have ever been interested in me. In fact, I can't even think of any girls. Even when I would get really drunk in the dorms, and still not one girl ever approached or even looked at me. I think it's because I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and instead of rebelling and becoming one of the more cool kids, I just became really introverted and kind of nerdy. I've been living on this farm for a good amount of time now, and not one person from my family has reached out to me, or even the people I grew up with. I hate to think this way, but I have fostered paternal emotions towards those females who are potentially carrying my babies. I probably wouldn't have these emotions if I ever saw them and was just told about them being pregnant, but now it's too late. The one thing I learned is not to cross Bob. He is as powerful in Mexico as Pablo Escobar. He pays millions of dollars in hush money to the Mexican politicians who turn a blind eye on this farm. However, I think the Mexican government would probably allow Bob to run the farm without him bribing them, because he's literally thinning the herd of South American immigrants and poor Mexicans that Mexico can't feed. I remember grazing those fields myself, and I could have been taken to the processing plant myself if Bob didn't decide to keep me as an employee. I'm at a critical moment right now where I have to decide either to do nothing or step up and stop those 3 baby carriers from going to the processing plant. I go back to my apartment and sit on my living room chair with my body tilted forward and my hands on my forehead, where I'm literally sweating from the stress that I'm feeling. After about 2 hours, I decide the best thing to do is keep those 3 women in my apartment for now. Since I'm upper management, I can upgrade my living space to a more secluded area where I wouldn't worry as much about being spotted with 3 cattle, which is stealing. I try my best to think this through, and having 3 pregnant women temporarily living in my 600 square foot apartment. I have to lock them inside my apartment though. I don't think they know how to open a door, and I literally have to make the apartment kid safe so that expected mothers don't harm themselves. So my ultimate plan is to tell the guards that I have to take the pregnant cattle to the processing plant, but instead keep them in my apartment until I move into the house. Then once I assist them with the ungodly birth, then I'll order a DNA test to make sure they're actually my offspring. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thank you for listening. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.